Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guests and get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars, such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we're thrilled to bring you this educational presentation today. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. The presenter will answer those queries during or after the webinar today as appropriate. And I believe we're going to hold most questions to the end. But please do put them in the chat box and I will make a list of them and make sure that they get addressed as long as we have time to do that. If you ask a question in the chat box and we don't have the time to get to it, please go ahead and leave your phone number as well. We will make sure someone reaches out to you. We want this experience to be as educational as possible. Please don't hesitate to reach out to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. Well, today I'd like to introduce you to our moderator. David Bailey is the president and CEO of RedBridge Advisors. He has been in the insurance and financial services industry since 2005. He attended Northwood University and has lived in Midland since he was born in the Michigan area there. He has worked with local charities and volunteered in the Mid-Midland Community Foundation Scholarship Committee. He and his wife have 2 daughters, and they enjoy summers in Michigan and love to golf, camp, and spend time with friends. And this is funny. He's not a fan of winter, as we have found out. Anna Lee and I are also not a big fan of winter. So that's something we have in common. David, why don't you come off of mute and say hello so people can see you?
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to introduce myself. I'm David Bailey, and I agree. Winner, of course.
Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce you to today's presenter. Anna Lee Kruger is the founder and president of CareRight Inc., the concierge of senior care planning. CareRight assists families in navigating the complexities that are associated with the aging process by managing crisis situations, developing a proactive aging plan, facilitating family meetings, and providing needed support to struggling caregivers. For Anna Lee, providing proactive senior care planning to families is more than just a career, it's her passion. Anna Lee has spent her entire 27-year career in the senior care industry, and it's become a nationally recognized expert in the field of senior care planning, having presented at a number of healthcare, senior housing, and financial conferences, as well as hosting dozens of webinars. I should say hundreds of webinars. She's a pro at this. She received her BS in social work from the University of Northern Iowa and her MBA from Cardinal Stritch University in Wisconsin. Anna Lee is the author of the upcoming book, The Invisible Patient, and that outlines the emotional, physical, and financial toll experienced by family caregivers. And this is a very important topic today, finding a care community that's the right fit for your loved one. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. Anna Lee, you can take over, and really excited to hear what you have to say.
All right. Hi, everybody. Let me get this pulled up. All right. All right. Oh, good. I like it when things work. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Lee Kruger. I am the owner of CareRight Incorporated. And then I also started another company in 2015 called Plan for Life Now, where I actually train financial advisors to become an elder planning specialist, because Well, as you get older, your needs are going to change, and your financial advisor needs to understand and identify what your new needs might be and be able to help you deal with aging issues and life outside of just the financial plan. So, today we're going to talk about choosing a facility. Just so that you have a little bit of background, I was a social worker and executive director in long-term care facilities. So what's called CCRCs, or care communities, care retirement communities, where they have the full levels of care, like independent living, assisted living, memory care, skilled nursing, and skilled rehab. And for 18 years, I did that. So for every day, I had families coming in to take a tour. You know, mom fell, she broke her hip. She's the primary caregiver of dad with dementia. Kids fly home and they're like, holy cow, what are we supposed to do? We don't know what the care options are for mom. And we certainly didn't realize dad was so demented until till they got home and realized really what the situation was. So in 2011, I decided to start my own company and really help families facilitate those family meetings about the what ifs of aging. When I would do the tour of facilities when I was still an employee, the tour would take about an hour, but I would spend 2 and 3 hours at a time with each family because they had so many questions like, what do we look for? What are we supposed to be asking about? And they were literally blindsided. Like almost every single family was blindsided because that medical crisis happened, right? Dad has a stroke. Mom fell. Nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, oh, I'm going to have a major devastating heart attack or a stroke. What's our family plan? So it catches families off guard, and it really throws them into a spiral of ickiness because it's uncomfortable, because you're going to be forced into making big decisions quickly. And most families don't ever have these types of conversations about what is our plan if there's a medical crisis, or if mom and dad can't stay at home safely on their own and they refuse home care, what is our plan? So the aging process, you would hope that the aging process would bring families together, but I'm here to tell you as a social worker and a mediator that it often does not. So usually by the time families come to me, they are in crisis mode. Family is not getting along. There's a lot of strained relationships. Their parents are medically complex and the kids are all overwhelmed and they don't know what their options are. And they are kind of getting tired of taking off work every time that there's an issue with their parents. So you would hope the aging process brings families together. I'm here to tell you that if you do not have an aging plan, your family and you will likely struggle, because you have to be prepared for what's coming down the road. So learning to cope with the changes, finding out that your loved one is ill can be devastating. You know, when you get that cancer diagnosis, or dad has Parkinson's disease, or mom has mid-stage dementia, that can be pretty that can be pretty upsetting to hear, especially when then you're not really given a lot of tools to understand what that disease process looks like. And if you don't take it upon yourself to understand and educate yourself about what those medical conditions mean, then you find yourself just trying to make it through the day, dealing with whatever it is that the situation presents itself as. So there's an emotional toll that happens, the guilt and grief of moving them into a facility. So say mom and dad are not safe to stay at home, or dad's not safe to stay at home. Like it's no one's bucket list to have to make that determination and that decision that it's time to have mom or dad move into a care facility, right? Like that's never on anyone's bucket list. So I thought what I'd focus on today is really choosing a facility and letting you know that there's a lot of different options. We called it nursing home in the title, but just know that this is actually helping you, give you tools for all sorts of different levels of care. And we'll talk about what that looks like. So, like I said, when I was still an employee and I was doing admissions and marketing for these facilities, families would come in mostly because mom fell, she broke her hip. Hospital says, here's a list of facilities. Go find one by noon tomorrow because we're discharging. If this was a live event, everybody would be like, yep, been there, done that. We know how this goes, right? So we know that families don't talk about the what ifs of aging, and we certainly usually don't run into families who already have like a plan made out of, if mom needs care, if she needs this type of care, this is where we're going to go. Families don't have their loved ones on waiting lists until they're actually needed to move in. So the hope out of this webinar is that you will have takeaways of knowing really how to choose care communities, whatever level of care it is, and then know that I'm available to help you as a consultant work through the rest of this if you need help. So tour questions, and I broke this down into different sections or headings, if you will. So training and safety. And some of this will apply to home care as well. But what kind of training is provided? Is it online? Is it short webinars? Is it a quiz? I'll tell you how it is. So in 2010, when the economy tanked, a lot of facilities actually hired in-person trainers like me to come in and train their staff on resident rights and resident sensitivity and helping understand dementia and behaviors and how to properly take care of the residents in those facilities. But when the economy tanked and people had to cut their budgets, in-person training was one of those cuts. And so what a lot of these facilities and home care companies also do is they have a subscription to like an online training module. And then there's like tons of different training modules. So there would be ones on Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, depression, ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, skin integrity. So there's a whole library of topics, but they're usually pretty short little webinar trainings. And what I've noticed since everybody went to like basic webinar trainings on demand is when you don't have that dialogue with each other as your colleagues, they don't always understand the material. Plus it's like a 15-20 minute webinar. And then they take a 5 or 10 point quiz. And so there's not a lot of dialogue. And when you're dealing with elderly people and you're dealing with dementia behaviors, it really helps these caregivers, these professional caregivers, to actually talk things through. So find out what kind of training they offer. They're all, of course, because you're going to be meeting with the salespeople, right? So of course, they're all going to say, oh, of course, we provide a vast amount of training, but really kind of hone in on that, especially if your loved one has like a certain type of disease, like your loved one had a major stroke. What specific training do you offer for people who have had major strokes? How do you prevent him from getting skin breakdown? So we'll go through this whole list of questions. How are the staff trained for dementia care and managing difficult behaviors? Say your dad has dementia, he's becoming aggressive, violent, paranoid, he might have sexual behaviors. So how are your staff trained to manage that? Like, walk me through what you would do if dad tried to hit somebody. How would you handle that? So be specific with your questions when you're doing these interviews with these companies, whether it's in this case home care or in a facility. How would you handle this specific examples? Are the staff CNAs, which are certified nursing assistants? Are they med techs, where they went through a few weeks of or a few hours of classes where they can administer medications? So are they med techs? Are they RAs, or what's called resident assistants? And what is the training requirement for each of those roles? How are the staff supervised and held accountable? Is there a shift supervisor who makes rounds to ensure care is being provided? Our staff are attentive to the residents' needs. So what you're asking about is what kind of leadership, supervision, and management do they actually have? They're going to tell you that they have all sorts of leaders and managers, they do, but are they out on the floor actually supervising what the staff are doing? Because the other thing I can tell you is that in healthcare, just like most industries, we have a shortage of people that are working. So we have a shortage of workers, but we also have a lot of turnover in healthcare. So when you have a lot of turnover, especially in those leadership positions, If the CNAs don't have anybody supervising them, that's when you really will see a lot of neglect and care complaints. So ask how the staff are supervised and held accountable. Who is my point of contact with questions or concerns? Again, this could be home care, this could be any facility. Who do I talk to if I have questions or concerns? You want to have that relationship with, okay, mom said that she didn't get a bath for 3 days or 3 weeks. Is this true? I don't know. Who do I talk to about that? Or mom said that she didn't get her pain pill. Who do I talk to about that? What is the next step if I am dissatisfied with the facility's response to concerns? So who do I go to next if you don't listen to me as a facility? So for example, because I do patient advocacy for clients and with clients. So when I have family complaints or resident complaints, if the charge nurse doesn't respond properly, or there's still continued ongoing complaints for care or diet, or the food is always cold, whatever the complaints are, obviously I have a care conference. I ask for a care conference so that we can talk through what these complaints are and find solutions so that we don't have these continued ongoing complaints. But what happens is if you are in a facility where there's such high turnover, or they really just simply don't seem to care about the outcomes of your loved one and their safety, then you would want to go to the ombudsman. Every state has an ombudsman. And if they can't help you, then you would want to file an actual formal complaint with a state regulating office. So that's how you can manage that if the facility just doesn't seem to be reactive to your complaints. Training and safety continued. We all know that as we get older, we lose mobility, and falls are, people can end up being a pretty high fall risk, especially if they have dementia, if they have visual impairment, cataracts, those kind of things, they can be a high fall risk. So what fall prevention interventions do you use? So say mom fell, how are you going to prevent those from happening again? So are they going to make sure that she has shoes on? Are you going to make sure that the bathroom light is on? So if she gets up in the night, she could actually see where she's going. Are you going to have to lower the bed so that if she does get out, she doesn't have as far to fall and doesn't get hurt? So ask what the fall preventions are, especially if your loved one is at a high risk of falling. Do you have a safety committee to brainstorm ideas to keep residents safe? So how do you work as an organization to make sure that the residents are safe? Are the caregivers trained before they work the floor? And what is your new hire training process? And who helps coach and mentor them so they do things right, the right way, right away, right? So who's overseeing them to make sure that they are taking proper care of your loved one and trained properly? And if they do make mistakes, how are those mistakes corrected? Will I be allowed to install a camera in my loved one's room? I absolutely, if you only have one takeaway from this webinar, it should be this one. So sorry about that. So what are the, come here. All right. So are the caregivers trained before they work the floor? What is your new hire training process? And the camera is really important because the facility shouldn't have any issues if you want to install a camera. And you should be able to install a camera if your loved one has a private room. So there's no roommate, because otherwise you have to worry about like HIPAA and the other residents' privacy. So the camera will give you peace of mind, because then you'll know what's actually going on in your loved one's room. But it also makes the staff be a little bit more aware of how they behave and how they interact with your loved one. Are there nurses on each shift? And what happens if a nurse is needed after hours? So this is going to be more for like assisted living, because not all assisted livings are required to staff them 24/7 with nurses. So like a nursing home, a long-term care facility, and a skilled rehab center, they do have nurses on all 3 shifts, but assisted livings are not required to do that. So ask the question on what is your staffing model, and what if a nurse is needed after hours? And what is your nursing and skin care protocol? Will a nurse check my loved one's skin every day? Because you want to make sure that your loved one doesn't end up with skin breakdown, because once they end up with skin breakdown, especially if they're diabetic, it can be very hard for them to heal. Training and safety continued. So this is, hopefully you're saying that this is really helpful, because these are a lot of questions that you might not have thought to ask on your own. So training and safety, are there call lights in the rooms? So in a nursing home and a skilled rehab unit, yes, there will be, but in a memory care facility, there probably won't be, because of the nature of the disease. People with memory impairment may not always know to push the call button when they need help. But in a skilled nursing center and a skilled rehab unit, they will have call lights. What is the expected wait time? So one of the things that we do with our patient advocacy clients is when we get to them to their room, or if they're a virtual patient advocacy client, I'll say, okay, Martha, that's a common old name. Okay, Martha, turn on your call light and let's time it. Let's see how long it takes them to come. I've had them come within minutes, which is what you want. And I've also had us have to wait 1 hour and 38 minutes for someone to come and help. One thing you're going to want to know is that because most of these facilities now have like electronic call lights, so they have like a report that they can print out and say, okay, well, Martha has been on her call light 3 times this shift. It took this amount of time to answer it. But what they'll do sometimes, because they're in a hurry, or because they have multiple residents that they have to take care of, is they'll come and they'll shut off the light, and then they'll say, well, I'll be right back. Well, they may or they may not be right back. So if your loved one, or if you're in a facility, or you find yourself in a rehab center, just make sure that, you know, if you do have complaints or concerns, that you let the nurse know, the charge nurse know. An expected wait time, appropriate kind of wait time, is usually 15 to 20 minutes max. So it should be way less than 15 to 20 minutes. Right now, what you need to understand is with COVID, a lot of these facilities are working with very, very limited staff. Some facilities right now are not even taking new admissions because they don't have the staff to take care of them. So this is why I keep telling people, you have to have an aging plan, because no one thought that we were going to be in the midst of a pandemic, right? So what are you going to do with your aging parents if their health changes and you can't be there to help them all the time? How often do caregivers do rounds and check on the residents? So in a skilled nursing facility, like a nursing home, they're required to check on them every 2 hours. So the more that you know, the more that you can understand what your care options are as well. How often will my loved one be seen by a doctor? So in a care facility, so in assisted livings, skilled nursings, and skilled rehab centers, and if these are all new words for you, just you can let me know and we can schedule a time to talk through all this, because all of these different levels of care are different. So in assisted living, in memory care facilities, nursing facilities, and skilled rehab centers, these facilities contract with physician clinics. So your loved one doesn't have to leave the facility, except if they have a specialist doctor, like a psychiatrist that they have to see, or a dentist. Most of the facilities contract with an in-house podiatrist. But if you have like a catheter and you have to go to a urologist, or you have heart issues and you have to see a cardiologist, then that's really when your loved one would have to leave for those appointments, is if they have a specialist that they have to see. Otherwise, most things can be done mostly in-house. The other important question is, do you provide transportation to appointments and outings? This is important, especially if you don't live locally. A lot of clients, or a lot of seniors, don't even live near their adult children. So how is your loved one going to get to their doctor's appointments or outings if they have them? Most facilities have like a van or a bus, but they might only go to certain sides of the town on like Tuesdays. So like in Fort Myers, I know that I have to book my client appointments for that particular facility on Tuesdays, and we have to be back by 3 o'clock because that's when the bus stops running. So these are questions that you need to find out. If you're going to try to do all of this on your own, you need to know all of these things to ask. How sick can my loved one be and still stay here? So this is more for assisted living levels of care. So assisted living levels of care, like in Wisconsin, for example, there are several sub-licensures. So like as long as your loved one can walk, they can live in that level of assisted living. But if they need a wheelchair, then they have to move into this type of assisted living level of care. Here in Florida, if you can't bear weight and you're a 2-person transfer, or you have a stage 2 skin ulcer, you cannot stay in assisted living in Florida. So the more that, again, the more you know, because the last thing you want to do is try to do all of this on your own and then get that phone call from the administrator that says, yeah, your loved one needs more care than what we can provide. Well, then what do? Now you've just caused another disruption in your aging loved one when they don't like to move in the first place. So now they might have to move again. So you have to know what you're doing to do this right. So what are you licensed for? Like how sick can they be? If my loved one can't stay here, will you help find alternative arrangements? Usually they will, but they won't put tons of effort into that because because they won't. So you really need to make sure you try to get this right the first time. Family communication is huge, especially if you've gone through having a loved one in any of these types of care facilities during COVID. You know that these facilities are just trying to make it through the day. They're not great at communicating with a family. So most of my new clients through COVID have been really ticked off family members because they had to move their loved one into a facility. And then they get there, they find out, oh, they're not getting the care that they want because they're not getting communicated with. So what is your communication protocol? Do you notify families of changes? When can I anticipate calls? Like, will you call me if mom loses weight, if there's a medication change, if she gets a skin tear, if she slips and falls? The answer to all of those is yes, you're supposed to get calls with any condition change like that. Do you encourage family involvement in using a team approach to care? You wouldn't think that you'd have to ask about this, but I've had clients in facilities where you could just tell walking in to go see my new client that the culture there was just really toxic. Like staff don't say hello, they don't welcome you, they don't help show you where the room is. And you can tell that like they're just very standoffish when family or advocates come in the building. So how often do you hold a care conference? With my patient advocacy clients, when they move into a new environment, like a new assisted living or a new facility, I call the social worker and say, look, I want to hold a care conference right away so that we know who all we're supposed to be talking to if we have concerns. But the more involved that you can be, the more likely your loved one might get better care. How will family be notified of COVID changes? So I'm here in the Southwest Florida market. We have a high number of COVID again. So a lot of these facilities are starting to shut down again. If they have one person, whether it's staff or employee, or I'm sorry, staff or resident test positive, they have to shut down for 14 days. So how will you be notified? So sometimes, like, because we have clients in all these different facilities across the country, so we'll either get text messages, we'll get an email. Some of them have like an auto voicemail that they just send out so that you know if you can visit or if visiting got shut down. And what is the visiting schedule at this time? Because that literally changes by the day right now. Cost and fees. Do you charge an entrance fee or deposit? Now, this is going to be for independent living and assisted living and memory care. How much does it cost for us to move in, to take a deposit? If you end up going into like a skilled nursing center, a nursing home, there's no entrance fee. But if you move into, like a assisted living or a care community, a CCRC, there's entrance fees. It might be anywhere from hundreds of thousands of dollars to an entrance fee, or a standalone assisted living, it could be $2,000 to $3,000 one-time deposit. Do you charge a waiting list fee? There's facilities in like Chicago, and some other facilities are doing this too, that, for $2,000 we'll put you on the waiting list. I have my parents on a couple of facilities waiting list. It was a $500 waiting list fee. So it just depends on where you are. Do you have a waiting list? How long do you anticipate an opening? So again, this is why it's so critical that you develop an aging plan, because you don't know when your dad's dementia is going to progress. You don't know when that stroke is going to happen. You don't know when that heart attack is going to happen. So you want to, if you expect to have better care outcomes, you have to plan for that. That's just common sense. So do you have a waiting list, and how long do you anticipate an opening? Just because you might have a facility down the street from you doesn't mean that it's the right fit. Maybe they provide terrible care, or maybe they don't have transportation, or maybe they have a lot of turnover, or maybe when your mom and dad need care, maybe there's a waiting list and you can't get in. So then what are you going to do? Or say your dad is the caregiver to your mom, and she has dementia and he's the caregiver. You shouldn't be surprised if the primary caregiver ends up sick, has a stroke, or dies, because the primary caregiver has a 65% higher mortality rate. And it's because they don't have a plan and enough supports in place. It's very stressful to be a caregiver. So need to know, especially if you have two parents and they want to be together, you need to figure out where they can move in together. What if mom needs memory care and dad needs independent living? Where are you going to go to get that? And where can they afford to go? What is your refund policy? So what if you move into one of these really fancy CCRCs, care retirement communities, that has all the different levels of care, and then you realize you don't like it, or something's changed and you don't want to live there anymore? What is your refund policy? You have to really look closely at those admission agreements. What specials or incentives are you running right now? Because of COVID, a lot of these facilities are sitting with a lot of empty beds. Before COVID, a lot of these facilities, the good ones, had waiting lists, but because of COVID, because of either people passing away, or families really trying hard to keep their loved ones out of these facilities because they don't know when they'll ever be able to see them again. And here we are now, a year and a half into COVID, and they're all locking down again. So a lot of families have done what they can to try to keep their loved ones out of these facilities. So these facilities have crazy like move-in specials, like they're locking people in for a 3-year financial commitment. Like you get this lower rate if you lock in for 3 years, because they're really hurting right now. What amenities do you offer? Do you have the transportation? Is there a swimming pool? So find out what amenities do you offer. Do you charge room and board plus level of care, and what are those rates? So a lot of memory care facilities will just charge like a flat fee. Like where my mom was, it was $5,500 a month flat fee. Other assisted living facilities, though, they'll charge you a flat room and board fee, and then the more care you need, the more you have to pay. So some clients are paying like $800 a month because they need medication management, for example, or they need help with bathing, or they need help with laundry. So they tack on extra charges for that. So you pay for what you use, which makes sense. And then how is that assessed? So if your mom needs more care this month, but then she feels better and she doesn't need as much care, like how often do they assess that level of care so that you're not overpaying, or so that she's not overpaying? Costs and fees continued. What other fees or out-of-pocket expenses should I anticipate? So the other expenses will be medication. I'm talking about people who are private pay, not on Medicaid. So if you're private pay, the other out-of-pocket expenses will be your beautician, and your medication and any other types of things that you might need that Medicare does not cover or that insurance does not cover. What happens if my loved one runs out of money? Well, then we look at Medicaid. So you need to find out, especially if your loved one is close to running out of money. You can't just get your loved one, especially if they're on Medicaid, you can't just get them into whatever facility you want. It has to be a Medicaid approved facility, and they have to have an open bed. And I can tell you that most of these skilled nursing centers are full. Like they might have 100-bed facility, but they might only have 10 beds earmarked for Medicaid. And that's why you end up, if you don't plan properly, then you end up with mom in a Medicaid facility 5 hours away because that's where there was an open bed when she needed it. You can also look at VA benefits, long-term care insurance, and what does that entail? Do you help with completing the paperwork for those programs and benefits, or do you have to do all of that on your own as a family? Like the Medicaid application is like crazy. It's like 16 pages. So again, the more that you know, the better decisions that you can make for yourself or for your loved one. How often do you raise rates, and what does that usually look like? It's usually 3 to 5% increase per year. Facilities like my mom's went up $600 a month because of COVID and all the extra expenses that the facility had to incur. Room and comfort of the home. What am I allowed to bring in to decorate the room? Well, I can tell you that in assisted living, independent living, and memory care, you can decorate it as if it's their own home, because it is. So you can bring in the bed and their nightstand and their dresser. But if you're looking at a rehab wing, because your mom fell and broke her hip and she's there for therapy, or a nursing home, those rooms are tiny. So there's only room in there for a bed, a chair, and then their wheelchair or whatever mode of transportation that they have. So find out what you can bring in. What do you furnish and what do you provide? How do you help new residents adjust? Some of them before COVID had like little welcome wagons. So other residents would kind of come by and take you under their wing and help you get settled in and help you know where the dining room is and where you go to pick up your mail and all that kind of stuff. But COVID has put the kibosh on all of that type of stuff. Can my loved one keep their family or their familiar daily routine? This is more feasible in independent living and assisted living, not feasible in a nursing home or skilled rehab, because they have so many residents in there. It's all about like staff efficiency. So you will likely have much less choice if you end up in a nursing home or skilled rehab. The perk of the skilled rehab is you're there for rehab and you get out. If you're there for long-term care in the skilled nursing, you definitely need an advocate. Money and jewelry, absolutely do not encourage to have significant valued items. Some facilities will provide a lock, but I would not recommend having money or expensive jewelry in the room, because you can't guarantee that it won't get either misplaced, lost, or stolen. Can I hang pictures? Do you provide internet and basic cable? Is there a computer room or a library? Most facilities do offer that. Room and comfort of the home. Can my loved one leave the unit at any time? Like, is there an enclosed courtyard with or without supervision? So a lot of memory care facilities will have an enclosed courtyard, and they can kind of come and go into the courtyard as they choose. But you still want to find out what their protocol is for that. Can my loved one bring his or her pet? Absolutely not. In a nursing home or a rehab center, but most independent living and assisted living centers do allow it, as long as you can still properly take care of your pet and it's up to date on shots and it doesn't bark or isn't aggressive. Do you have pet therapy, music, craft room, swimming pool? So again, kind of find out what are some of the things that make them different from their competitors. Can I bring my pet in to visit? So find out about that. Right now with COVID, they're not really allowing anything extra in. Where can my loved one go to smoke? I can tell you every single facility will tell you that you either can't smoke at all, or they might have a special smoking area. But all of these facilities, if they're licensed, they have the fire marshal that comes through. So they have to follow the state rules and regulations. Can my loved one have alcohol in the room? Some facilities are different than others. Again, that's why you have to find out. If my loved one has a roommate and they are not compatible, what do you do? So this is more for like, if your loved one is in a double room in a skilled nursing center or a rehab center or a memory care facility, they obviously want to try to have roommates be compatible, but that's not always the easiest thing to do. Environmental observations: are the staff pleasantly engaged with the residents and the residents responding positively to staff? So when you go to do the tour, look around, look and smell. Are the staff smiling? Do they appear friendly? Are there any odors or any loud noises? Obviously, if you choose a room by the nurse's station, it's going to be really loud because that's where they all hang out and talk. And that's where they also do shift change. So, but just look around. Do the residents look like they're happy and well taken care of? Is the facility updated with furniture and the equipment seem to be in good working order? Like, do they invest in making it look like a nice home, because this is going to be their home? Does it look like an institution? Are there Hoyers? Are there machines in the hallways? Does it look like a hospital? Are residents in wheelchairs lined up along the wall? Like this was very common, because then the nurse just comes by and gives them boom, 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 their pills. So look to see, like, do the residents look like they're actually engaged and active? Ask to see the activity calendar. Is there anything on that activity calendar of interest to you or to your loved one? And how do you make sure that they actually get to the activities? Does someone come around and knock on the door and invite them? Or how do you make sure that they get to the activities that they want? Do the residents have input in activity program? Yes, they do. They have what's called a resident council. Your loved one can volunteer to be on that committee. Do you offer community outings like to the zoo, performing arts center? They all did, or most of them did, until COVID. Does my loved one need money for these events? That's a question to ask. And what services, church services, do you offer? And how would my loved one receive communion? Meals. So I told you this is like jam packed. These are like question after question, because the more you know, the better decision you can make on behalf of either yourself or your loved one. Meals, ask for the menu, look at it. Does it look like there's appealing things on there? Or are you going to be paying $8,000 a month and then you look and there's like macaroni and cheese and hot dogs and bologna sandwiches? So just look for the menu, look for the activity calendar. Do the residents have input into the diet? Again, yes, they do, because of resident council meetings that they try to get residents' input. Can residents choose from a menu? Most facilities at this point do allow, most of the facilities do have a menu that you can choose from. Where does my loved one eat? Look at the dining room situation. Does it look conducive to like a place where you would actually want to eat? So right now, a lot of facilities are still eating on those styrofoam containers in their room because of COVID. So again, if you're looking at having to make a move during this kind of very unusual time that we're in, these are questions to definitely ask. Like, will my loved one be able to actually leave their apartment or leave their door, like leave their room? And what can they actually do for socialization and stimulation? Can my loved one have food in his room? Can I bring in a mini refrigerator? You have to get authorization for that. And do you allow for special diets? So in assisted living, you have to ask about the special diets because some of them aren't licensed for that. So if you require anything special like ground or mechanical or pureed, you might not be able to stay there. Can my loved one see a dietitian if needed? In a nursing home and skilled rehab unit, that's part of what you're paying for, is a dietitian to oversee their meals. If you live in independent living or assisted living, if you want a dietitian and they don't have one in-house, then you'll have to contract with one and hire one. How do you manage diabetes? That's a huge question. You also need to find out, if you're looking at assisted living, if they can even manage diabetes. So before your loved one moves in anywhere, they have to pass a pre-admission assessment. They have to have a doctor's order and they have to be seen by their doctor for like a history and physical before they move into any level of care. So when you do the tours, you have to look around, smell. How are the staff treating the residents? How were they friendly to you? Did the residents look like they were well cared for? So you have to really, just like you would never send, hopefully, your young little child into a daycare without ever like doing your homework, you would not do the same thing. Like you would do the same thing for your aging loved one, especially when they're vulnerable, if they're demented and they need care. You wouldn't just be willy-nilly about where it is that they go. You have to do your research. So when you do these tours, I just keep a notebook and I have a pros and a cons side. Like, what did I like about it and what didn't I like? And always schedule another tour. So don't just tour one time. Now, if you've waited until you're in a crisis, then you might not have a lot of options. But that's why I, again, for 10 years now, have tried to get consumers to plan ahead, because if you don't, you end up in whatever facility has an open bed, and that may or may not be the right fit. So hopefully you'll have the luxury of time to schedule 3 or 4 more tours so that you can really feel comfortable putting your loved one on the waiting list of those places that you would feel comfortable going to it if they couldn't stay at home. How to approach your parents if they need more care. So that's the tricky one. Is, okay, mom and dad are not doing well at home. How do I talk to them about this? We'll actually probably have a whole nother webinar just on that topic too. But other considerations, and that's also what I do with the aging plan, is I take the lead on facilitating those family meetings and talking to moms and dads on behalf of their kids about what's working and what's not working well. That's part of what that aging plan is. Other considerations, I touched on this earlier. What if you have 2 parents and they both need different levels of care? So what if mom needs memory care and dad needs independent living because he can't stay at home or he doesn't want to live alone after mom moves into memory care? Most couples don't want to be separated at this point in their life, so you have to plan ahead. So I know that was like packed full of like tons of information and might have been a little overwhelming because you're like, holy cow, I didn't think I had to like find out about all this kind of stuff, but you really do. Like I said, you would never, I would hope, never just willy-nilly put your kid in some daycare or some school or some program without doing your homework. And the same is true for your parents. You can't just assume because they charge $14,000, $16,000 a month, you can't assume that just because your parent needs care and you're paying all this money that they're actually going to be properly taken care of by properly trained staff. So any questions that have come up so far?
$50,000 to give me. So I was like,
Yeah, one of the questions that was asked is, can you go over the levels of care again?
Yes. So independent living level of care is basically you just going into an apartment. So it's unfurnished. You might have to provide the toilet paper. You'll have to provide your furniture, your linens. So that's independent living. They may or may not provide meals. They usually will provide like one meal. They'll also have like different meal packages. Each state is different. So depending on where you live, you need to find out what's included in my independent living apartment fee, but there's not care that's included. So if you move into independent living and you need help with bathing, dressing, and grooming, you'll have to pay extra for that through a companion company. So that's independent living. Assisted living is you need more care. So you need more hands-on help with bathing, dressing, grooming, housekeeping, but you also need more activity and socialization. So assisted living centers have call lights. They provide usually 3 meals a day. They have a nurse on during the day shift. And then if there's a nurse needed for second or third shift, they usually have one on call, unless it's part of a continuing care community where they can just have a nurse float from the nursing home over to assisted living. So it gets complicated. It gets complicated. A lot of families don't understand all of these different levels of care and the nuances. Assisted living also has the med techs, the medication techs, and administering medication. They charge room and board fee plus level of care. So I have clients paying $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a month in assisted living because they need that much care. They have activities, they have socialization, they have outings. So assisted living is really where a lot of people go when they've been at home too long because the family or your loved one says, well, I'm going to age in place at home. Well, what they don't realize is that they end up getting so frail that now they don't even qualify for independent living. They only physically qualify for nursing home level of care, which is a very different look and feel. So you got to move into assisted livings while you still can physically qualify and you cognitively qualify. Because if you have dementia and you're wandering in and out of people's rooms, you can't go into assisted living. You have to go into memory care if you're a wander risk. Memory care is usually a secured or locked facility, a locked unit. It's usually 20 to 40 residents in a unit. All meals are provided, activities, socialization. The staff are supposed to be properly trained in dementia care. So that's memory care. And then skilled rehab is if you fall and you break your hip and you need to go in for physical therapy and occupational therapy after you get done with your surgery, then you go into skilled rehab. So you're there temporarily and you're there to get like hardcore therapy to get you stronger so that you can go back to wherever it is you came from, whether it's home or assisted living or independent living. Nursing home is long-term care. So those folks are where people stayed at home too long and now they're too medically complex and they don't qualify for assisted living. They only qualify for 24/7 level of care, which is the nursing home. So those folks don't go back home. They're there to stay until they pass away.
All right, thank you. That was a good answer. Another question, when should you get a parent on a waiting list?
Now, because every day that you don't plan, someone else did. That's why there's facilities that have 3 to 5 year waiting lists. So that's why when we do the aging plan, I ask, what's working well, what's not working well, what are your goals? And if you had to move somewhere, where have you already looked? Like, where are you at in this whole process? So now, because the other thing is with COVID, COVID has made people really wake up and say, what is our plan for mom and dad? Like, it's really disrupted families and said, what is our plan? So now is the time to get all this information taken care of, because you don't want to be doing this at midnight on a Saturday. And that's when crises happen.
All right, yeah. Nice, thank you. Another question, what is the state regulating office for care communities?
Well, each state has a different place. So like here in Florida, it's ACA. So if you Google, like truly every state has a different place. It might be Department of Health and Human Services. So whatever state you live in, you have to Google, how do I file a nursing home complaint? And then that's what will pop up.
Okay. And then do you have a specific type of camera you recommend?
So I have 2 cameras. One is a NetView I've had really, really good success with that. So you're going to want, if you do a camera, you're going to want to get one that like pans back and forth so you can see. And it also has a really good speaker. So like my favorite one is NetView. My other one is Wyze. It's WYZE, and I got them. They're like $30 on Amazon.
All right. Another question, how do you find out about the regulations for care facilities? Where would you
The
find that out?
regulations are their state surveys. Which one?
Well, like for example, being checked on every 2 hours. Like how would you find out what the regulations are for those facilities?
Yeah, so you can actually you can either Google that if you want to do the homework. I mean, these facilities have like their rules and regs are like, it's crazy. It's like 7 manuals. So we help families with all of that because we do all the legwork and all the research for you so that you don't have to waste time trying to figure all this out on your own. But you're welcome to go on the state website and research what different levels of care and what they're licensed for and how sick you can be to stay there. You can also, when you're doing the tour, ask those questions. That's why I gave out all of those questions. So the more information you know, the better prepared you can be and the better decisions you can make on behalf of either yourself or your loved one.
Well, I believe that's all the time we have for questions.
I can't believe I got through all of that. I was like even adding lib, and I'm like, oh, they need to know this and they need to.
Well, and I'm sure that you have, a comprehensive, and this probably isn't everything that you
Oh my
have
God,
to,
no.
yeah. And so really appreciate you coming in and talking to us. Thank you, David, for moderating. We want to thank our attendees for attending. Look for an email soon with a link to watch the replay of this. You probably will have to take notes.
Well, I put in the chat box too to see if this was helpful information or like too much information overload, because that helps me be a better presenter for another topic or another time. So I always value feedback. So I put in the chat box, was this helpful?
Thank you so much. Well, here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping people find an advisor who's the right fit for them, their life, and their financial questions. Our matching service is free to you. Every one of our advisor partners is committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. So find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending, and we will see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.